Welcome to NRGscapes Ocean and Space latest presentation that we've put together called Beyond Fuel. And our catchphrase there is we're not building a vehicle, we're building a domain shifting interface. So this represents a new frontier in aerospace, defense and energy mobility. And just in the bottom corner of the title slide is a mathematical equation that we'll talk a little bit more about later, that captures what we're trying to achieve in terms of technology transfer when it comes to unidentified anomalous phenomena, and that's net energy change across the craft's boundary layer membrane stack, because we're putting forward a proposal for developing a membrane technology that mimics what we're observing with UAP in terms of deforming the scalar boundary and producing rotational field torque. So that forms a part of the presentation a little bit later on. And just a quick background, I'm the founder, owner and director of NRGscapes Lab. I work with a small team of people globally on image processing and quantum imaging of videography and photometry from our own data or empirical data that we've gathered in the field on UAP, and then applying that in terms of space-time manipulation technologies. Just as an overview of the presentation itself, we're going to work our way through a background, a research aim and hypothesis, some observational criteria in terms of how we gather data and analyze it. We'll look at evidence of lattice interfacing, scalar EM coupling, mechanics, energetic boundary layer modulation, and then we'll talk about development of membrane materials and the role of porphyrins in that in terms of technology development. And we'll also take a look at human imaging of human field interactions and subterranean structures and field wells, because we've been doing a bit of image analysis and quantum imaging of some evidence of this going on at a specific location in Western Australia. And then we'll start looking at domain crossing mobility mechanics, the mechanics of how this works in a craft and the architecture of that craft itself, and the implications that has for developing this technology and collaboration, and just wrap it up with a conclusion and next steps. So the presentation itself is based on a lab research report that we put together and published recently called Interfacing with the Lattice Towards Resonant Field-Based Mobility Across Domains. So if you Google that, that paper will come up, and this presentation is based on that empirical data and image analysis that we did for it when we published it. In terms of a background and theoretical basis for the presentation, we're looking at overcoming traditional limitations of thrust across domains, whether that's in submarines in terms of propulsion, so nuclear, diesel, electric, surface-based in terms of nuclear, diesel, electric, traditional fuel combustion, and airframes as well. And we go back and look at field models and the limitations of Maxwell and Heaviside's equations. We look at their expansion in terms of scalar extensions and reinstating the scalar variable, and we look at how that applies in terms of physics and phonon resonance and boundary layer effects in terms of scalar fields and energetic coupling. So our contribution in those terms is on dynamic coupling with substructure lattice networks, basically designing technology that will couple with the scalar field and allow transfer across domains with ease, overcoming inertia and mass. The research aim and hypothesis, well, the objective is to demonstrate feasibility of resonant field-based transmedium mobility, of course, and the hypothesis this is based on is a transduction interface that enables synchronization with ambient energetic lattice through scalar EM coupling. And there's a little diagram there that shows the energetic lattice, the scalar EM coupling, and the transduction interface within the craft itself. So essentially we're developing a domain interface wrapping a structure around that allows that to occur with or without an operator or occupants. And the craft there itself is going between ocean, air, and space, deforming the scalar boundary layer and allowing that to happen. In terms of observational context and methodology, a lot of empirical data has been gathered through videography and photometry and put through the basics of image analysis and then quantum imaging. So we start with smartphone or IR cameras. They go into Google Photos for pre-processing. We do desktop quantum decomposition stack analysis. So we look at stacking frames. We look at taking out color and color banding. So we get that bandwidth separation, putting noise speckling in, doing the frame stacking, and we can trace all that imagery back so we can prove that we're not artificially introducing anything that wasn't already there. Now, in terms of lattice interfacing, this is based on the technical report, and we've put together some three-dimensional or image models of the results of that paper. So you can see here we've got orb and rob energetic engaging with an energetic lattice, and the representation of those results in terms of a digital image. So we can see in both we've got ingress vectors, we've got lensing boundaries or gravitational lensing boundaries, and flow bifurcation in terms of harnessing the energy from this lattice. It's like taking panes or slices of panes of glass through this four-dimensional field using our quantum imaging, and then putting together a three-dimensional image of that and understanding the how energy is coupled with or brought internally and allows for this object to construct itself within this domain and encase itself and then orientate and navigate through that. So we often see these octopus-like adhesions coming from these orbs and rods, reaching out to ports in the lattice or nodes that they seem to harness energy from and move between within this lattice structure. Now, in terms of the mechanics of that with scalar and electromagnetic coupling, what we've got here is a diagram that is a representation of what's going on internally and externally from that image that we showed in the previous slide. And you can see that we've got an internal vortex that's generated like a toroidal field, a central conducting rod that brings that or conducts the current generated from that to an external membrane. And then we have scalar phonon emission. So you've got electromagnetic field entrainment internally through this vortex, toroidal vortex, and electricity production, and then surface resonance, which allows deforming of the scalar boundary and coupling with energetic fields within the lattice. So your governing parameters are going to be frequency, modulation, phase coherence, and of course the charge density as represented in this diagram. In terms of modulating the energetic boundary layer, the toroidal charging ring internally and the conducting rod interact and allow field alignment dynamics and modulated repulsion zones. So you generate this repulsive field which overcomes inertia in three-dimensional space, and then you deform this scalar boundary layer, which enables the object or craft to harness the energy and couple with this lattice and jump between nodes. And there is a mathematical model for that, of course. So if you look at the diagram there, you see the energetic wave interface at the top, and below is the modulated lattice field. Now in between is the boundary lattice or lipid membrane, which is porphyrin-based, surrounding this domain shifting craft that we are suggesting can be developed, or a product developed for it and then tested in the lab and in the field. So the mathematical model, of course, models how dynamic charge and magnetic flux variations control the energy envelope of the craft. And now that's based on observations in the field from empirical data we've gathered through videography and photometry of this boundary layer effect, and then looking at quantum imaging and breaking down these layers to understand what's actually going on that you can't see visually. Now we think this models or shape the model. The mathematical model demonstrates how the shaping the repulsive field boundary and enabling stable propulsion occurs through otherwise resistant media in terms of what you observe, and that's three-dimensional physical space, which is bound by the laws of gravity or Newtonian physics. And this overcomes all that, of course. Now, in terms of the mathematical model itself, we're going to do a little bit more work about how this applies to the membrane itself or the membrane stacking in terms of energetic field coupling, but it basically represents how energy variation across the transmedium craft's layered field envelope depends on two dynamic field parameters contained within the brackets, and that the change in energy is a function of those. So it represents the net energy charge across the craft's boundary layer from the membrane stack that we propose. Now, this includes contributions from both electric and magnetic field dynamics as the system interacts with the surrounding energetic lattice and scalar field. And this goes back to and is related to Maxwell's expanded electrodynamics and Heaviside expanded gravitomagnetics. So the function itself indicates that the change in energy is not just a linear relationship. It involves non-linear, resonant or coupled effects that can be directed and controlled. So the two parts of the equation, for example, the first part can be modulated by the angular charge configuration of the second part, especially in scalar resonant field coupling. So we'll break that down in the next slide. Now, in terms of the first part of the equation, it's to do with the time rate of change of magnetic flux density. So the term stems from Faraday's law, of course, implying that time-varying magnetic fields induce circulating electric fields. And you can see that demonstrated in Maxwell's electrodynamic equations, of course, as well. Now, in this context, it's linked to how a modulated toroidal ring or spinning magnetic disk produces fluctuating magnetic fields to deform the scalar boundary and allow for energetic coupling between what's produced internally with the toroidal field and the external four-dimensional scalar field of geometric potentials that is outlined in Maxwell's original quaternion notation. So the second part of the equation is related to angular gradient of charge density. So what it implies that rho, the charge density, and phi, which is azimuthal or angular, is an angular coordinate around the craft's axis. So it allows for orientational directional control. It represents an asymmetry of charge or modulation around the circumference of the object, especially relevant in a toroidal configuration. So you've got this toroidal field internally. It allows for modulation of that around the craft and directional control in terms of resonance and energetic field coupling. So it's non-uniform, it's an angular charge distribution. It produces directional propulsion or rotational field torque. And just a little bit more here in terms of deforming the boundary, because that's what it's all about, the boundary layer between electromagnetism and the scalar field. So this occurs across layered membranes. We'll talk a bit more about that in subsequent slides. But we've got a multi-layered composite material like porphyrin, which is what we're suggesting, that holds a charge across the hull of the craft and acts like a scalar emission shell. So basically a shell around this domain shifting interface that is contained internally. So each layer of that membrane may respond differently, and that's why porphyrins are so good in terms of their capacity to hold a charge and vibrate differently to field variation. So the change in energy can accumulate across this interface depending on field alignment and material resonance, which can be controlled and directed. Now, in terms of the actual membrane materials and the role of porphyrin, now the chemical structure of the porphyrin, because it's a biopolymer, it enables lattice vibrational coupling, right? It's photoelectric and scalar, produces chiral scalar phonons, and absorbs light. So that's where we think part of the boundary layer effect and anomalous phenomena in terms of invisibility is a byproduct of the technology that is used, or a model of that, or mimicking of that in nature, because we think this is probably a naturally occurring phenomena too that we have been unaware of. So in terms of molecular coherence and environmental resonant tuning, it's all about phonon production in terms of energetic coupling and frequency modulation and resonance. Now, in terms of the structure of the membrane, we suggest the actual chemical composition of the membrane in the paper that goes with this, and that it's stacked or printed in layers with a lipid bilayer separating them. So it enables resonance across the layers, which generates chiral scalar phonon production. At one particular site, we also encountered an anomalous craft, or got photos of it, and there was a person there as well, and also there seemed to be some sort of subterranean architecture going on when we did quantum imaging. So we had the object in the sky, we had the person, and we had the subterranean architecture. Now, in terms of humans, what we found in quantum imaging is that there seemed to be a human underfield ingress from above and sides due to this energetic field coupling. And what we found is that there were scalar pathways entering the cranial zones of this person standing within the anomaly itself, which is under, or in the position under, where the object was prior to that person being there. So there seemed to be evidence of some sort of permanent portal there that was being utilized by the craft, and there seemed to be some sort of subterranean structure generating what was almost like a magnetic field or gravity well around the whole area. Now, it suggested some sort of ambient lattice and trained neural interface has the potential for domain transit control. So essentially, the opportunity may exist for a human to interact through a stacked membrane with the scalar field via the craft and enable control with or without an operator. In terms of subterranean structures, again, we've got a diagram representing that here. The same hill, we detected Doppler shifted inflows and flare loops that were a little bit like solar magnetic arches or prominences that suggested the portal. So there was further evidence that there's something going on with this hill, and that we suggested a buried power source there that generates this field prominence that needs further investigation, and that the object was taking advantage of that and knew that that field source was there, maybe even to manifest in our dimension and move off from somewhere else. So that particular site requires a lot more work to see what's there, both in terms of subsurface structures, surface-based anomalies, and what's going on with gravitational lensing around that whole hill. Now, in terms of domain crossing mobility mechanics, the explanation in terms of developing these transmedium craft is that the scalar field negates medium-specific resistance from water and air, and in the vacuum of space you've got another transition is going on as well. So we want to craft a domain shifting craft that can go seamlessly across these different domains in terms of air, sea and space through boundary layer distortion and scalar field harmonization. And the diagram of the craft there is an image that was generated that is demonstrating this capability and capacity to do so. Now, in terms of the craft architecture, we're in phase 1 moving into phase 2 in my lab at the moment with our small team in terms of gathering more empirical evidence, looking for foundational mathematical models to describe scalar field dynamics and coupling mechanisms. So we're well into that. We have 2 years of publications tracing our whole journey on our ResearchGate page now for the last 2 years, and trying to secure funding to move into phase 2 and look at actually approaching a chemical engineer to develop this biopolymer porphyrin membrane and print it so that we can test it in the lab for scalar phonon production and resonance, and then look at a model in the field to test scalar phonon coupling with an energetic lattice, overcoming the limitations of mass and inertia. So phase 3 with significantly expanded funding is the bench scale test platform, which leads into developing the model to be tested in the field as well, which requires significant resourcing, of course. But initially for the next 2 years, moving from phase 1 into phase 2, is that field work, getting the membrane prototype produced so we can start looking at testing. We've got a simplified exploded craft architecture on the right there. There's a lot more to it than that, but you've got the lower and upper shell. The shell has the printed membrane on it. You've got the field modulation layer below that in terms of conduction, the core assembly for toroidal field production for EM, repulsion, and the power distribution layer. Now, implications for peer collaboration, because no person is an island, so we need people with reach across the disciplines to coordinate all this, so we can bring siloed experts in their field in, but a physicist can't do this by themselves, an engineer can't do it by themselves, a biologist can't do it by themselves, because it encompasses your earth science, physics, biology, engineering, materials science, all needs to come together to do this. So we invite collaboration across the field, but it really boils down to 3 fundamental points, and that's empirical based data and quantum imaging, advanced materials science, and resonant physics. So it's interdisciplinary in nature. Conclusion and next steps is it's a step in evolution, of course, because we're looking at field-based propulsion as a shift from the mechanics of thrust to resonance. So we're looking at empirical signals, materials science, and dynamic geometry, because it is all about geometry in terms of coupling with the scalar field within this 4-dimensional lattice that is there, but we can't see physically with the human eye. So the next steps are to validate resonant tuning through membrane construction, and that's the construction of the controllable interface. So it's really moving from phase 1 in terms of empirical evidence and imaging or quantum imaging into phase 2. So you've got to remember, we're not building a vehicle, we're building a domain shifting interface and putting a craft around it that allows occupants to be in that domain shifting interface ultimately and jump between nodes or coordinates in this lattice to anywhere really in a relatively short period of time. And when we're talking to Mars and back in hours, to the nearest stars in days or weeks and on a return trip. So thank you very much for listening to this. Like I said, our whole journey is published on ResearchGate, about 26 publications now over the last 2 years. Been at this 5, 6, 7 years in total. LinkedIn page has an NRGscapes profile there, and we have a YouTube channel where we put all these narrated presentations and a lot of other information on our journey as well. So thank you very much for listening.